Today's episode is brought to you by 9centprinting.com. With over 100 five-star reviews, 9centprinting.com is ready to meet all your printing needs. Are you a church plant or small church with no copy machine? No problem. 9 Cent Printing has you covered. If you need bulletins, flyers, books, cards, offering envelopes, posters, they do it all. I know the Christian owners of this business personally, and I'm not just a fan, I'm also a customer. Fast, nationwide shipping, affordable, professional, wow printing at wow prices. Check them out at 9centprinting.com. All right, welcome to the Small Town Pastor Podcast. This podcast is a ministry of Small Town Network. We exist to make disciples, train pastors, and plant churches in smaller communities. I'm joined again by my co-host, Tony Colomb, and today we're joined again with Kyle, who was just telling us in our previous episode, starting to tell us about how he got on staff at the North American Mission Board. And so, Kyle, why don't you just pick up right where you left off? You said you accepted the job at the end of 2020?
Yeah, said yes at the end of 2020, came on board like in May of 21.
Oh, 21, okay.
And yeah, I mean, so we were in New Mexico at the time, and things were really just starting to kind of open up. And the only thing my boss had asked, he said, you know, really, this job is to cover rural, period. He said, so, you know, you're gonna be traveling all over North America. He said, there's nowhere specific that you need to live. It would just be really great if you were somewhat close to an airport. So at the time we were an hour and a half from the closest airport, and it was like, yeah, that's not going to work if I'm flying out, you know, 3-4 times a month. That's tough. So we started looking, and really, I mean, we looked at some spots all over the country. Looked at Houston, Dallas, Kansas City, Denver. Looked at staying in New Mexico, maybe the Albuquerque area, and at the end of the day, we finally settled on Lubbock, Texas, which is about 30 minutes from where I grew up. I was talking about that in the last episode, and really just sensed, you know, this was an opportunity to come home. My wife's brother and his family lived here in Lubbock. My mom still lived in my hometown, about 30 minutes away. And so yeah, in May of 21, we moved back to Lubbock, Texas, and started this position of a rural specialist. And I said I'd worked for NAM for a couple of years before that. So not long after I got to Alamogordo, I think it was about a year in, I went to a conference that our state convention put on. And at that conference, they gave out Mark Clifton's book called Reclaiming Glory, which was kind of one of the first books that was being written on church revitalization, church replanting. So if you remember, like that phrase revitalization really kind of picked up some steam in the early teens or so, 2010, 12, 13. And I'd heard a little bit about it, read a little bit about it, but this one was the first time I read a book and it really clicked, like, oh, I think this is what I'm doing. We didn't call it replanting at the church that I was at, but everything he talked about in that book is what we were trying to do. And so they had some contact information at the back of the book. I reached out and I just said, hey, I read the book. This is where I am. This is the situation, you know, leading a small church with a whole lot of debt, like trying to reach our community. These are the things. And that conversation led to some follow-up conversations and relationships. And about a year and a half later, I got a call one day and they said, hey, how would you like to do a little bit of writing for us, maybe manage some social media, and we'll pay you a little bit for it.
Sweet.
I mean, always, yes, right? Yeah. A side gig is always a positive thing. And so I came on board with them in 2018, and it just led to a contract position, led to a part-time position, which ultimately turned into a full-time position.
Right.
And so what is that? Like, what do you do? Like a rural specialist? Like, what does that mean? Like, what do you do?
So I spent a lot of time on calls with rural pastors all over the country. We have some tools on our website, assessment tools for guys to assess themselves, as well as assess where their churches are. And so we have a lot of follow-up conversations with those. And then traveling, I spend a lot of time working with local Baptist associations, local state conventions, or state conventions. Just we do some events throughout the year. We put on some stuff just really to encourage rural pastors, because there aren't, as you guys are probably aware, there aren't a whole lot of conferences out there that are tailored towards
Nope.
rural pastors,
Right.
and even more than that,
Right.
that are willing to go to where the rural pastors are to put them on, right? So we started what we call our rural summit. We do one kind of national event every year in Salina, Kansas.
Oh my gosh!
And because so the North American Mission Board headquarters are just north of Atlanta in a suburb called Alpharetta. And as we were talking, we our team does some stuff there. I work for the overall team is called the Replant team at NAM.
Okay.
Rural's kind of fall into that. So our Replant team, we do some stuff at the headquarters in Atlanta. But man, when we started looking at this rural thing, we said it does not make sense for us to do this in Atlanta. We need to do it in rurality somewhere. And so the guy that I work closely with, my boss, Andy Addis, who is a pastor in Hutchinson, Kansas, he said, hey, our the state convention has this great camp in Salina. It's rural and it's affordable. And I said, sold, we're done. Let's go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So we've done that for the last 3 years. And this next year in 26, we'll host it actually at a church there in Salina, but still.
That's awesome.
And so we do that, what we call national event. We've had around 100 guys or so that'll show up to that. But then we started going and kind of doing more regional events too. We did one in Louisiana this year. We have one in Arizona scheduled for August next year. We're actually coming up, Tony, to we'll be with the Oregon Mission Coalition in July. And
cool.
so doing some stuff up there in Oregon. And
Cool.
so just giving me the freedom and the opportunity to go to these rural spots, right? And we're working with some local associations, local partners. But I mean, a lot of times, like I'll travel somewhere and there's 8 or 10 guys in the room, and in some of these spots, like we are thrilled to get 8 to 10 guys in the room to be able to walk through and encourage them and just talk through some rural ministry things.
I think it's awesome that the SBCs even got that like focus, because I'll be honest, and I don't mean to sound like some bitter person about it, but it's like I get tired of going to so many conventions that like our fellowship holds, because it's usually the guys in the urban areas with the churches of multiple thousands that get, the speaking opportunities. And, I'm not trying to promote myself to get those. That's not it at all. But it's like, I don't connect. It's like there are some things that translate regardless of size and location in ministry. But there's a lot of like classes or focuses or themes where it's just like, okay, that's cool, but that's not my context at all. And it feels like everything is geared up like this is where we should aim,
Well, and I remember as a youth pastor going to some conferences, and I would be in this breakout, and the guy who was leading the breakout was in a church that was larger than the community where I lived. And his youth ministry was larger than our whole church, right? And so, I would remember walking out of those things and going, man, that was great. Right. I don't know how to use any of that. I'm not sure how that applies when, I may have 5 kids, I may have 30, like depending on the Wednesday night. I just don't know how to translate what I just heard into that. Right. And so, we set out to design these events and gatherings that felt rural, right? We're giving good content. We're giving some solid resources, but it's not flashy. It feels rural when you walk in there, right? And to us, that's really important. And again, we just have this conviction that if it makes sense for a rural strategy, we have to go where the rural guys are.
That's right. I love that.
And I've even I've even done a couple of days where I'll like fly into somewhere, like I've done this in like Nashville, where I'll fly into Nashville and then schedule like 2 or 3 meetings in the area over a couple of days, just to say, hey, I want to maximize my time. I want to hit as many people as possible, but that's not going to happen in a central location. We're going to have to get out to where the folks are.
Dude, you're like speaking my language. I flew out in July. I flew out to Kansas, and I got appointments with like 4 or 5
Yeah.
people for a couple of days, and our churches, and no agenda. Like just
Yep.
wanted to go connect with some guys, encourage some guys,
Yep.
networking. But I mean, the closest to was probably 3 hour drive.
Yeah.
And just did this like route for like 3 or 4 days. And
Yeah.
well, hey,
And
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, and as when we get into the article too, we'll talk about. So there's some places, and even here in North America, that are not just rural. I would say they're remote. So for instance, the eastern half of Montana has 90,000 people in it.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're going to serve that area, we're going to have to rethink the ministry model.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of ways to do it. We can talk about that a little bit too, as we dive into just kind of some of the realities and the realities and rurality around as well.
Well, let's use that as our segue to get to the article. And
Mhm.
I'll say I agree with you. That's one of the things that in our network, we're only planting churches with bivocational pastors, and most of our pastors so far are lay pastors that we're kind of raising up, because there's no way they're going to go be a bivocational, pastor.
Right.
And you can't recruit a guy with the MDiv to go to a town of 2,000 to be part-time and start a church from
That's a
scratch.
very hard sell. Yeah.
And if he ever, even if he got it running, the idea that that's a full-time position, none of the church planning models fit those kind of communities. Like
Right.
we're not going to fund someone full-time salaries to go to a tiny town, and
Right.
they're probably not going to become a self-supporting church in
Sure.
that scenario. So
Yeah.
I agree with you. The article that we read from I think was it on Lifeway's website?
Yeah, it's through Lifeway Research. Yeah.
Okay, it's called "What is a Rural Church?" You posted on October 30th, 2025. I just really liked the article. It wasn't, real big, but you hit on some things that I highlighted. And one of the things you said, it says, well, it seems like we may be sidestepping the issue. We've come to realize that rural folks function more like a people group than simply a population segment. Um, you said your next line is "here's what I mean," but do you want to unpack that a little bit? Like, what do you mean
Yeah.
that they function more like a people?
Yeah. So what we'll say on our team is that rurality is a mentality. Another way I'll say it is if you're rural, you know it.
Yeah.
Rural folks think different than city
If
folks.
you're rural and you know it, clap your hands.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And so, I mean, we've haggled over how do we define rural. And as I say in the article, there's not a single clear-cut definition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen everything argued from 50,000 people and less to even down to like 2,500 and less, right? That's a huge gap that defines that somebody out there is defined rural. So for us, when we say that rural folks are a people group, it has to do with that mindset, right? If you have somebody who grew up on a farm, grew up in a small rural town, there's a way of thinking that sticks with you for life.
Mm-hmm.
And Glenn Damon in his book, The Forgotten Church, will talk about 3 things that he would say encompasses rurality. And that is rurality encompasses the isolation of where people live. So there's a sense that, when the grocery store closes at 6 p.m., that there's an isolation, right? Something breaks in the middle of the night. I remember as a kid, something like our hot water heater started leaking in the middle of the night. My dad had the number for the guy that owned the hardware store, and he met him down there at like 2 a.m. to get the part to fix it. Now that hardware store doesn't exist, right? So what do you do if something breaks at 2 a.m.? Well, you're stuck. Reality encompasses the way people earn their living. There are some central economic kind of bases in rural ministry, usually agriculture of some sort, right? Farming, ranching, typically the school system, the healthcare system, And then where I grew up, there was an electric co-op that was a big deal, big employer. But all of those kind of exist within the same ecosystem, right? So if it's a bad year in on the for the crops, it affects everything else. If there's a big shakeup at the electric co-op, that affected, and like folks were having to move, that affected the school system, affected the hospital system. It affects everything, right?
Yep.
And then reality encompasses the values people share. There is still such a thing as small town values.
Right.
Obviously, the internet is changing that a little bit. We
Right.
are not as isolated as we once were in rural communities, but there's still a sense of community that you get in a small town that you just really don't have in bigger cities.
Right.
Folks having full-on conversations. As a rural pastor, I would have, I would pray with folks in the Dollar General like aisle, right? Because that's when they would see me and say, "Hey, oh, Pastor, can you pray about this?" Sure, let's do it right now, right? That doesn't necessarily happen in big cities.
Yeah, it's like you go to, my wife will send me off to Costco with a grocery list, and I'll show up 2 hours later. She goes, "Okay, who all did you run into?"
Yes.
So,
yep.
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's different. And so all those things together. And like I said, even if somebody moves out of a small town, sometimes they'll still carry kind of that mindset and those shaping values from a small town into wherever they live. So
Okay, so let me this real quick, because in the article you said this really cool thing that really got me thinking. You said, I would argue you can have rural churches even amid some of the largest urban centers in the nation. And I was like, that unlocked a thought, because we started this network called Small Town Network, right? And our idea is like we're going to plant churches in small communities. Well, and we've done that, but we've also had some opportunities. Like next year, we're going to plant a church in Flagstaff, which is not a small town. It's like 70,000. But we kind of were wrestling with that. And one of the things we like stumbled upon is that small town is almost as much as an adjective as it is a noun.
Yep.
That there's churches that have a small town feel,
Yep.
even though it's not necessarily in a small town. And because small town, I think to your point, has a kind of a culture to it. And like I love that. I love that if you're small town, like you have that.
And even in a spot like Flagstaff, right? College town, you're gonna have small town folks there.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so I think this is something that we haven't really explored as much as we should. But that is, what would planning a rural or a small town church in a big city look like? Because there are going to be people that identify with that, right? And say, man, this feels like the church where
That
I grew up.
in. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And I mean, man, and there's so many formative moments, right? If you grew up in church, there's so many formative moments that happen inside a church, right?
Yeah.
I mean, between baptisms and funerals and weddings and holidays. I mean, there's all these big milestones that folks look back and a lot of times I think when they move to a city, when they're looking for a church, they say, I want a church that has that, right? Whatever that quality is, I want that. And a lot of times, I mean, I'm not anti mega church whatsoever. I've never operated in that world.
Right.
But I'll just say there's a quality to a small town, small church that is really special. And that a lot of folks will connect with in a way that they won't in a room with 2,000 people.
Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah. No, I totally get that, man. I agree with that. Tony, we're going to say something?
Oh, I really appreciated in the article how you brought up how, you can't peg a rural church to one specific kind of church. Like there are differences, and I feel like my time at Ozark in Joplin, Missouri just highlighted that because that's kind of that part of the country, right? Like Southwest Missouri. And you're 2 hours from Kansas City, 4 hours from St. Louis, an hour and a half from Tulsa. Like those cities are kind of out there.
Yep.
And a lot of us guys got the chance to preach in places like Bernal, Missouri, 250 people in town and 15 people going to one of the three churches.
Yeah.
But then you also hear about, preachers like David Bycroft, who's out in Tyro, Kansas, of all places, with a couple hundred people. And the church is bigger, like 2 times bigger than the town they're in.
Yeah.
Because all these people come from little churches to that. And so you've got just these dynamics. There's a diversity in feeling and style and worship, and in the rural area that I think a lot of people are not paying attention to.
Right. And where a lot of pastors and worship leaders get in trouble is when they try to force a model onto their church.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But I mean, look, and I'm not promoting one model or the other. What I am saying is you need to know your community and you need to know the people in your church.
Yep.
Because I've walked into some, one of the great things about this job is I get to experience a whole lot of different churches around the country. And I've walked into some where there are, it's folks in their 70s and 80s primarily. And the worship leaders up there singing the latest worship songs from Hillsong.
Yeah.
And it's like,
disconnect.
Man, read the room.
Yeah, dude.
And you can tell, I mean, that's the folks, they want to worship, but it's uncomfortable, right? And I'm going, man, listen, you sit up there with a piano or a guitar or man, a cappella, and you start belting out something like Blessed Assurance, man, those folks are gonna sing. And so understand, like, the most important thing is not that you have the experience or a certain style of worship or a certain model. Like, man, build something that makes sense for the community and the church where you are. And let it have the way that I've heard it described is when folks walk into your church on Sunday morning, does it feel like the community around it? Does it look like the community?
That's a great question.
Right. Yep. And, so if you're in a small town and you walk in on Sunday morning and the lights are out and there's smoke and lights and all that probably doesn't feel like anything else in the community. Right. So churches have to make sense in the context where they are. Right. And I just think sometimes we see something and we think, man, that's such a cool experience. We need to replicate that here. No, you don't. There's a reason that church exists the way it does, where it is. Your church should exist where it is for the same reason. And it's okay to have a completely different flavor. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Make your church make sure your church makes sense in the community where it is.
How many people, like I've been a pastor for 30 years now, and I've watched the purpose-driven life fad or where everyone like, oh, I got this kit from the big church in California and there's this program. And if we do it, then and it's like, and it's a total misfire, right? Because it doesn't fit the context. So I love that. You said something else in the article that just kind of rung a personal note with me, because when I got ready to plant for a second time, we're non-denominational. We have parachurch organizations that kind of champion planting, like Small Town Network. And I had a couple organizations offer to work with me, kind of help support and stuff. And when I finally, landed on one, they fiercely tried to talk me out of coming to my town because they're like, it's too small. And Twin Falls is not an actual small town. It's like 50,000, but I want to go to Twin Falls and I want to target smaller communities around Twin Falls in rural Idaho they all have Mormon churches and Catholic churches, but a lot of them don't have like a New Testament church. So I want to go to Twin Falls, and they're like, don't go to Twin Falls. It's too small. There's not very many opportunities. I mean, like a hard sell, off of Twin Falls. And I literally said to the guy who's a good friend and a mentor, I go, people in that small towns need Jesus too.
Yeah, that's right.
They're just as lost as the people in the cities.
Yep.
And in your article, I'm quoting, these folks need the gospel too. And so when I read that, I was like right on, man. There's people out there that actually live outside of metropolitan areas.
Yeah.
And guess what?
Yeah.
They're also lost in their sin,
Well, and here's the reality. All right. If we're going to reach the 60 million people that live in rural America, that's, as I shared in the article, that's a huge geographic area. Yeah. So 80% of our people in North America live on 3% of the land mass. That's all of our cities. And so the way you equate that, 80% of our population lives on land mass the size of Colorado. The remaining 20% are everywhere else. Yeah. So here's the thing. Mega churches aren't going to do that, right? What we need are tens of thousands of churches of 30, 40, 50 people in their communities
Amen.
that are reaching their communities. And,
Love
and
that.
here's what we have to understand, that a church of 30 people can be healthy and
Absolutely.
active and making disciples and reaching its community.
Faithful to the
Yes,
commission. Yep.
absolutely.
Yep.
And I mean, look, you can have a dysfunctional church of 30 people. You can have a dysfunctional church of 3,000 people.
That's right.
Right. So the goal can't be size. It has to be healthy, gospel-centered, Great Commission focused churches.
Mm-hmm.
And we need all kinds of models to reach this, right? So I mean, multi-site networks, circuit rider preachers that say, you know what, I can preach here at 9 and here at 11.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say this, if for the guys that are kind of looking into like multi-site or network models and all this, I'm not opposed to that at all. Here's what I would caution against. Don't feel like you have to replicate your location somewhere else.
That's right.
You can have the same values, you can have the same missional alignment and all that, but don't be afraid to have a different culture, and for that church to have a different flavor than yours does. That's okay, because especially if you're going to a different community, that community is going to have a different culture.
And that's what multi-site, I think, fails to take into consideration, is that you can't, transplant culture. You can't transplant DNA from one place to the next.
Right.
Maybe if they're like all in the same little city, but like you can't export context.
Right.
So
right. And that's where multi-site rubs me the wrong way, because when they start saying, man, this location finally feels like one of us, right? Finally feels like the environment, the experience that we want to have. And my thought is, but that other place isn't you. You know, each of your locations should have its very own culture based on the community where it is.
So like one church, 3 locations, right? Or one church, 5 locations.
Right.
I always think it's 5 locations, 1 staff is what you should say, because it's not really like one church. These people don't know each other. They don't ever meet each other. So I know we're sensitive on time. So let me ask you to comment on one more thing, and then we can kind of wrap up. You made the statement in the article. I was so thankful for this. You said you're not serving. If you find yourself serving in a rural church, you're not serving on the B team or the JV team of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing something. You said you're doing valuable and needed ministry among people who are loved and valued in the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
So happy that you said that, because it's not a lesser assignment, right?
Right.
So real quick, I guess the 2-part question would be, why do we think that way? Why do we think that a small rural church is the B team? And I think you're onto something. And then maybe the comment is like, is there upsides of small town ministry that people haven't considered?
Yeah.
People that might be thinking, well, that's like a stepping stone job, or that's I got banished to Siberia kind of job. What are they not taking into consideration?
So I think in rural ministry, it's easy to think you're on the B team because you don't have the resources of larger churches. You don't have the influence. You don't have the reach. You don't have the
recognition.
Recognition. And honestly, like a lot of our rural pastors, and I think we're going to see more and more of this in the years to come, are serving bivocationally, right? So they're working at least a part-time, oftentimes a full-time job in the marketplace somewhere. And then they pastor as well. And sometimes it can be easy to see, well, I have to do this. I know I'm called to pastor, but my church can't afford to pay me full-time, so I have to do this other thing, right? And it's easy to say, well, I'm just a bivocational pastor. No, you are a pastor. You have another job, like the Apostle Paul did, right, to support your ministry. So I think the shift that's important there is to realize I'm not working this other job just so I can be a pastor, but I have the opportunity to minister in the church, and I also have the opportunity to minister through this job in the marketplace, whether it's as a school teacher, and begin to see those things as linked. In fact, I like the language we're beginning to see more and more of co-vocational rather than bivocational. So it's not segmenting it, right? But it's saying, I have 2 careers. I have ministry and I have this other thing, and they work together as a part of my ministry. I mean, look, let's be honest. There's some jobs that it's easier to do that in than others, right? But anything can be done to the glory of God,
Right.
if you have that mindset. And so, I think that's where networks and associations and state conventions and denominations have to do a better job working around our bivocational pastor schedule and making sure that we're taking the steps to include them in things, and not, if you schedule a meeting at 2:00 on a Monday afternoon, you're going to leave out some bivocational guys. Like a school teacher is not going to be able to do that, right?
Yep.
So let's make sure that we're not scheduling everything that excludes these guys. That's the first part. And then what was the second part of that question?
What are some of the things, like some of the benefits of like living in small towns and small town churches that maybe people haven't appreciated?
Man, listen, as a small town pastor, you're going to be able to have a connection with your community that large church, mega church pastors would die for in their cities. As I said, if you're a small town pastor, if you're there long enough, you're going to be the community pastor. Where you're going to have people who would never come to your church, but they consider you to be their pastor. And you're going to be the one that they call when there's a death, when there's a crisis. And that will give you the opportunity to minister far beyond the doors of your church.
Yep.
And then, I mean, man, plug yourself into the community, right? So, I mean, football games on Friday nights, basketball games. If you have a theater, if you have a movie theater, go and hang out and get to know people. Have those conversations in the grocery store aisle, because you're going to have a wide influence of ministry and the opportunity to touch lives in a huge way. As I said, that city pastors, oftentimes they don't have that same connection to the community as a whole. And that is a huge feature of rural ministry, not a bug. That everybody knows who you are, and that you have the opportunity to have those conversations with folks. That's a huge plus to rural ministry.
I love that. I've thought, I didn't raise my family in a big city or a small town. It was about 35,000. Raised my kids, but in that smaller rural kind of county seat of a rural county, great place to raise a family.
Yeah.
I know, like my kids are living in Phoenix, my daughter and her husband with their two little babies, and they're asking the question of like, do we want our kids to go to school in the city, and wrestling with some of that. And there's quality of life things I think that people often have not considered when they think about small town.
And look, this is not to idealize small town. I mean, small towns have their problems. And oftentimes, I mean, they have the same problems as big cities. They oftentimes don't have the resources to meet those needs.
True.
They're full of sinners, just like the cities are, right? I mean, it's the same. But what we are saying is that if God is calling you to small town rural ministry, there is great work to be done that's valuable to the kingdom of God. And so don't feel like that you are, like I said, somehow on the JV team because you're not at the big church in the big city. God has big plans for the small places for sure.
I love that. Let's end on that. Do you have a score prediction for Oregon versus Texas Tech in the second round of the college football playoffs?
Well, I mean, so you're assuming that Oregon gets past James Madison.
They are.
Okay.
They are.
So
want this to be on the record.
I mean, listen, I can't go against the hometown folks. So
okay.
I'll say it's going to be close.
Okay.
I say 34-31 Tech.
34,
late field goal.
31 Tech. I'm going to go 28-24 Oregon.
Okay.
So we'll let the record show. All
right. There you go.
So people, if they want to get a hold of you, is the pastorkb.com your best?
Yeah, that works. Churchreplanters.com is our website.
Replanters. I'll put that on the show notes.
And then if they're looking for me, replant@nam.net. That goes to our team, and they'll get it to me as well.
As in North American.
Yes. Yeah. NAMB. Yep.
.com, you said?
.net.
Okay, .net. Got it. All right. I'll put all that on the show notes. Wait, I just want to thank you again for jumping on with sisters and giving your time around the holidays, and I really appreciate hearing from you. Let's
Yeah.
go ahead and wrap up our episode. To our listeners, be sure and check out our sponsors at 9centprinting.com. If you like what we're doing, please like or subscribe wherever you watch or listen. If you're interested in Small Town Network, you can find us online at smalltownnetwork.com. And if you believe in the importance of planting disciple-making churches in smaller communities, we'd love you to consider partnering with us in prayer and financial support. You've been listening to the Small Town Pastor Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by 9centprinting.com. With over 100 5-star reviews, 9centprinting.com is ready to meet all your printing needs. Are you a church plant or small church with no copy machine? No problem. 9 Cent Printing has you covered. If you need bulletins, flyers, books, cards, offering envelopes, posters, they do it all. I know the Christian owners of this business personally, and I'm not just a fan, I'm also a customer. Fast, nationwide shipping, affordable, professional, wow printing at wow prices. Check them out at 9centprinting.com.